Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for spending time with me here at the Enterprise Data Summit. I'm Kash Mehdi, Vice President of Growth at Data Galaxy. What that means is I spend a lot of time with our data leaders and customers, helping them establish enterprise-wide data initiatives. And today I'm presenting you a very good topic of mine that I've collated, learning from customers and various partners across the globe. So let's dive in. Let me go ahead and share my slides here real quick. So the topic of my slot today is really about how do you unleash your data strategic force. And I'm going to be providing you some guidelines that you could go about operationalizing and also learning from this. And I'll be very curious to learn from your experiences as well. Before we jump in, I want to hit on this particular topic about managing data as a strategic asset. What does that really mean? If you look at, on average, every 12 to 18 months, organizations are experiencing a massive amount of data, almost doubling, tripling every 12 to 18 months. Now, this data, when left ungoverned, it could turn into data silos. Now, so one of the biggest challenges when it comes to managing data as a strategic asset, it's really about organizations trying to move data from all these different data silos into the hands of data consumers so they could go about their daily business activities, whether creating reports, performing predictive analytics, and other types of business needs. But data actually goes through the journey here. If you look at 5 different chevrons on my slide here, you could see data is stored across various ecosystems, infrastructure, whether it's in cloud, on-prem, data processing, which is really about transforming your data so your data teams can actually use this data. And there's also other dimension around this life cycle where there are a lot of data consumers making sense of this data, which is about analytics, predicting the future with data. And then you also have governance and security. Governance, to me, it's really about making sure everybody in the organization has a common understanding of data. All stakeholders understand how the entire business runs on data. And security is about making sure right people have access to the right data. So in this context of managing data as an asset, what organizations are really trying to do is taking this data from these data sources, taking it through different life cycles, and putting that into the hands of data consumers. Now, the organizations that want to stay competitive, they want to do this as fast as possible. But let's also look at the role around the data itself. So if you have heard about chief data officers, in the past, many of the chief data officers' role was focused on risk and compliance. If you remember the 2008 financial crisis, a lot of the banks came out, they realized the big financial crisis actually happened because of the lack of visibility around data, especially around how they were diversifying funds, managing customer assets and whatnot. So if you look at the 2008 reports, a lot of the updates around the chief data officer role, many of the chief data officers were appointed to focus on risk and compliance. But in today's reality, this has completely shifted. The role itself has moved from risk and compliance to being more business value and business oriented. In fact, many of the chief data officers are evaluated solely based on business oriented metrics. And let's take a look at it. So some of the ones that I think about is brand reputation, which is about making sense of data, understanding your customers, providing them products that would create value for them. And eventually for customers, they look at your brand differently with a reputation. Increasing revenue, which is really about understanding data, the demand of your customers, your business needs, and also monetizing that data to launch new products, new services, and other things that would be of value. Data-driven decision-making. It's really about using data to take calculated risk. If you're a stakeholder, you're looking at a report, you want to make a business decision, you want to have good data backing up that decision-making. And then, we also see many of the chief data officers are also measured on literacy, enabling the entire workforce to use clean and trusted data to go about their activities. And of course, regulatory compliance, which has continued to be a driver across many regulated industries. And lastly, operational efficiency, which is How do you monetize your data for internal and external needs so you are more efficient when it comes to your supply chain, managing your employee relationships? It's also about efficiently handling your data from its storage through its life cycle and other aspects. So in a nutshell, many of the chief data officers today are measured based on business-oriented metrics. Now, let's also look at their biggest challenges. In fact, MIT Sloan Management School recently published an article that outlined survey results from Fortune 1000 companies. In fact, many of the chief data officers, when asked, "Hey, are you driving innovation today using data?" only half of them said, "Hey, I'm able to drive innovation." And these are different companies that took part in this. You also, one of the biggest challenge for chief data officers is also about being data driven. And as part of this survey of these Fortune 1000 companies, only quarter said they are data driven. Managing data as an asset, 40%, and shared accountability, which is at 20%. So because of these challenges, you also see the average tenure of chief data officers is also impacted. In fact, here is one of the biggest takeaway that I have from this survey, where CDOs are not lasting in their role longer than 2 to 2.5 years. And this is not just because they're failing to drive innovation or manage data as an asset, accountability, or be data driven. There are many underlying problems that they face on a day-to-day basis. One being lack of executive support, being able to help your C-suite executives realize the importance of data for them to really act on this. The other one I also see is the data literacy, the willingness for people to actually change in terms of like driving change management, where using data as a strategic asset. When you literally say this, it's really about using trusted data when you have a project, when you create a report, perform predictive analytics, and other kinds of tasks. So the average tenure here is 2 to 2.5 years. One of the biggest things behind this is also the challenge around data consumers. Now, anytime I walk into a customer meeting, I see that organizations, their data users have several challenges. Let's take a look at some of these examples here. If you're an analyst, you're a data scientist, finding data is really hard for you. You're comparing data that's stored in system A versus system B. You're wondering if this data is the same thing or does it mean different things. You're a data scientist, you want to be able to have accurate data so you could test the accuracy of your models. If you're a data steward, your biggest one is to make sure everybody in the organization speaks the same language. For you as customer, for me as client, how do we tailor this together? If you're a data architect, your biggest challenge is to make sure you have the appropriate business context to be able to document your data products, be able to document your business in your infrastructure. Like, for example, if you're a bank, you launch a new credit card. That credit card is going to have a name, type, a geographic location, a certain clientele. This is the context that data architects need in, anytime there's a new product being launched or a new service being offered. They need to accurately represent this inside of the data architecture so the business can accurately report on it. So really, really big key area. You also see, excuse me, you also see data engineers, system owners. They are working on constantly documenting data sets, monitoring data pipelines. For data engineers, they got to have a single platform where they could cross-collaborate with other personas of the organization. If you're a system owner, you want to know who is using what data for what purposes. In fact, this reminds me of a customer story, some of the challenges. I was meeting with this asset management firm out of Boston, and they said, "Hey, Kash, our regulators are coming in and asking us, hey, show me the quality of this product of this type. And it takes us 5 to 6 weeks to respond to this query." And I asked why that is the case, like it's taking such a long time. They said, our data quality is hard-coded in our ETL processes. We have several different applications. So we have programming code. in different pockets of the organization. So for us to really bring that forward, reconcile, validate with our business and technology stakeholders, it takes us a long time. And a lot of these processes are manual. So just to give you the context, like, for any organization, if you have data consumers struggling with these challenges, this is going to impact your ability to be data driven. And in fact, going back to the average tenure of chief data officers, they're not lasting in their role longer than 2 to 2.5 years. So my biggest takeaway here is really about focusing on these individual users to drive change management. Think about their productivity goals when it comes to data itself. The next big one is the priorities that the chief data officers face, and they have so many expectations from the leadership, from people who need data to be able to go about working on their business activities. But if you see here, I like to share it kind of like, you go to a restaurant, you have a menu, and you know what you want. For CDOs, these are several different priorities. Again, by all means, I'm not suggesting this is like a one thing that fits all, but they could be evolving use cases depending on your industry, depending on your business need, maturity, and whatnot. But if you look at self-service analytics, this is about CDOs making sure organizations have a self-service capability. So analysts, scientists, and other consumers are productive in terms of their activities. Regulatory compliance, this is about making sure you're responding to the regulators with appropriate insights, protecting your customer information. You have privacy-related regulations like GDPR, CCPA, and each country, region coming out with their own regulations, how data should be handled by these companies, and how they can use this when it comes to third-party sharing, internal innovation, and other aspects. Data literacy and enablement is also a big topic where how do you make sure you're breaking those data silos, black box silos that lack appropriate business context. So being able to use that to drive or understand your customer patterns, your service offerings, product that's being bought by your consumers. How do you enable your organization with enough literacy so they truly lead every project, every initiative with trusted data? And digital transformation, which is really about lifting and shifting data to the cloud, where governance, cataloging could be a big area for making sure data is well-defined, understood, has the appropriate level of ownership. But again, there's several different use cases. I'm not going to go through all the different details, but feel free to take a look at these use cases. I'll be sharing them offline right after this event. But one use case I want to bring your attention to is the ESG use case. Before I get into that, I want to also highlight, we recently did a Chief Data Officer Masterclass at Data Galaxy. So it's a 3-day event where we have, in the last season, we had CDOs from 8 different countries coming in to connect on their business drivers, challenges, and also exploring solutions together. As part of the CDO Masterclass, what we did is we ran a survey. We gave this menu to our attendees and asked them, hey, what are your top priorities? And guess what? These are the survey results. The top priority for many of the chief data officers and data leaders attending the masterclass was about data literacy and enablement. Second, digital transformation. Third, critical data certification, which is really about certifying your data before it actually gets consumed by the data consumers. In fact, it reminds me of a customer where they had this certification process where they said, a report is not certified if you can't tell me where you got the data from. And change management is another big topic that was common. That's why I highlighted this in a different color. Common topic for many data leaders, and also one of the biggest challenges that they're also trying to solve. You can also read more about this. There's a link here on this page. I'll share this offline, but feel free to take a look at it if you want to learn more. But coming back to the ESG use case, this is about how, as a company, you could report on your carbon contribution. So ESG, for those of you who are new to this, it's really about environment, social governance. The environment aspect is about your carbon footprint, greenhouse gas effect, things like that, your emissions, things like that. Social is really about how does a company how does a company work with its employee, treats its employees or its clients, human rights and other aspects. Governance about its management structure, stakeholder engagement, stakeholder rights, and many other aspects. In fact, if you're not familiar with this, I would definitely recommend learning about this. SEC, the US Security and Exchange Commission, mandated ESG reporting for any public company. So they have to report on scope 3 of the ESG use case. And I'll get through what this means. So in the ESG use case, there are 3 components. Scope 1, it's about any direct carbon emission that your company is owning. It could be your buildings. In fact, I was on a panel with a leader from Johnson Controls, and they manage smart buildings, right? They said 40% of the carbon emission actually comes from the buildings. So direct emission could be related to your facilities, your warehouses, your equipment that you're using, things like that. Scope 2 is really about any third-party energy procurement needs that you have, like you're purchasing your electricity, your water supply, you're procuring your heating and other things. So scope 2 is really about reporting those variables. And scope 3, which is being mandated by the SEC, it's about all your indirect emissions working with third parties. Like if you have a supply chain process and you have transportation that yields larger carbon footprint, then this is something that you have to report. It could be about distribution of your goods from one region to another. So scope 3 really deals with any indirect carbon emission that's related to your third-party relationships. But feel free to take a look at it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to also, as part of today's guide, I want to walk you through a SwissLife case study. SwissLife is one of our valued customers at Data Galaxy. They use Data Galaxy today, and they've recently shared their journey as well of their digital transformation. But let's take a look at it. So before I get into the slides, I want to give a big shout out to Emmanuel Dubois, who is the Chief Data Officer at SwissLife, a leading insurance provider, who offers many of the insurance products to consumers. So one of their data strategy pillars, like there are 4 pillars of their strategy. The first one is about governance, where building robust policies, establishing ownership across the stakeholders, and also approaching the way you deliver clean and trusted data to the enterprise. The second one is data analytics. This is about SwissLife taking in this approach to create a self-service environment for analysts, scientists to go about doing their job, and providing a single point of truth for all data consumers across the enterprise. Data innovation, this is about prioritizing different business use cases around data, building and running proof of concepts, proof of value for stakeholders to get literacy around this. Also building a data champions community. So they had identified different actors, business, technical, involved in this. Data culture is also another big one, where how do you engage your top management, get their executive buy-in, democratizing success, and also taking this risk-based approach where you're working on high-profile data use cases. And then this is their governance framework, and I really like how they approach this. So I'm not going to go into all the details, interest of time, but if you look at the governance aspect here, it's all about making sure you have the right charter, you have policy standards, so structuring, and this is also important. So if you're someone as a data leader, you're going out there and building your own data environment or governing ecosystem, you got to understand how your organization operates, whether it's centralized, decentralized, federated. So here in the governance dimension, it's about structuring, standardization, and coordination with others. Then the second big piece is the data acculturation. So this is about leveraging different levers in the organization to make sure you are strengthening your actors, facilitation of value, culture to different people. And if you see, this is all connected to the security, at all times, the chief data officer team, the data teams, make sure they were complying with regulatory requirements, also working with all of the security protocols, integrating with their data ecosystem, which is really critical. And then if you look at the second half of this, which is about data management, so it's about understanding your data. So they started cataloging information, mapping data, how it connects with different assets in the enterprise. Then you have quality, which is about impactful decision making, making sure there are appropriate standards met, appropriate stakeholder expectations met when it comes to quality. Then you also have protection. So putting in place data protection as a standard best practice when managing data as an asset across all the processes. And then if you see here under the data management chevron, you also have the bigger picture, which is about collecting data, sharing data, storing and making data available. So this is about the enterprise-wide self-service. And if you see here, it's also connected very tightly with the security protocols. And if you see at the bottom of this slide, you have exporting and valorization of your data. So what they did is they created new use cases. The chief data officer's team, I'm quite impressed with this because they had the pipeline of different use cases. Like you see insurance management, regulatory compliance, customer focus innovation, and other aspects of the organization. So feel free to take a look at this framework. As a call to action, what I would say is take this as a guide to personalize this, what fits for your own organization. Now, they also shared several areas of success. So change management, they said starts day one. You have to build your data community. You have to continue to invest in people. So they took this approach of change management because it's also one of the hardest things for chief data officers across the globe. So how do you build this community early on when you're undertaking this initiative? So it's really critical. Second one is they adopted a mixed approach. So hybrid approach of top down as well as bottom up, meaning they onboarded several different executive sponsors, like leaders who understand data as a strategic asset for the enterprise, and also keeping the end users in mind about their adoption, about their productivity goals and other things. And then also being ambitious. Sometimes, when I walk into a meeting, I'm faced with this dilemma, right? Customers want to boil the ocean where they connect to all the different systems, applications. But what SwissLife did really well is they identified different quick wins that would help them move the needle, get everybody on board. So 3 different takeaways here, keys to success. There's more to this, which is self-service. It does not mean it's an open bar. We understand that gating data has become a thing of the past. Like all organizations today are making data fully available for all the enterprise. But it doesn't mean that you have unfettered access to this data. So at SwissLife, they realized they still needed a degree of control as well as personalization to meet user expectations. Then you also have building upon reliable and undisputed data sources, which is about making sure you never compromise on quality, the standards, and making data a priority for all projects and data initiatives. And lastly, investing in people, because governance, cataloging, or any of your data initiatives, or any activity for any given business requires the connection with the human. So leading with empathy, training your champions, training your data users, providing them appropriate support, coaching, and going through their life cycle of learning as well was a critical area for them. And then right from here, I'm going to give you 4 key tenets, what you could take to build a sustainable organization. So, working with several different customers, I've learned a lot. So I'm going to bring you these learnings as well. So this concludes the SwissLife story. Let's shift to the 4 different tenets, how you could democratize knowledge across the enterprise. So the first key tenet is your operating model. So you've got to figure out how your organization operates. Like, do you have centralized authority that takes all the decision? Do you have federated authority, or do you have a decentralized authority? In my opinion, working with so many different customers and seeing success with them is a hybrid model, a federated approach. So at the top, you could have your highest level of decision making. And then in the middle, you have a data governance council. And here you can have actors from different parts of the organization. You can have governance managers, data owners, system owners, architects, quality leads, privacy leads. But really, their role here in the governance council is to take decisions on key data priorities. And then you also have the stewardship, and this is the layer which is where the magic happens, right? So I'm using an insurance example where sometimes companies compartmentalize their data by different domains. So here you have business lines. For each of the business line, you could identify a business steward and a technical steward. So their job is to make sure they work on each of these focus areas to ensure data is fully trusted and have the highest visibility across the enterprise. So top down, bottom up is the approach here in your operating model. The second big one that I want to highlight to you is the data domain approach. So once you have this operating model figured out, you gotta prioritize your data domain. And sometimes this could mean your domains like customer, product, vendor, and each domain could have several different variables like owners, glossary definitions, your dictionary, your business processes, policies, standards, list of systems that hold information about a particular domain of data. So the second key tenet is really about identifying your domains. And then once you have these domains, the third tenet is really about report certification or your critical data elements. So instead of boiling the ocean, what I would suggest is within a data domain, identify what's the most critical asset. It could be your 10 reports, it could be your 10 KPIs and other things. As an example, I'm using a report catalog where I have one report identified, which is revenue forecast report. This is actually inspired by working with some customers where they have established a report certification process where a report is not certified if you can't tell me where you got the data from. So here you can see how this report is connected to its attributes, revenue, growth, commission, pricing, as well as in its technical copy within the enterprise data warehouse, and then other systems and applications. And then lastly, in the report certification process or any approaching this challenge, sometimes when you go out there and tell people, hey, I've got a data quality problem, why should I care about this? So one of the biggest challenge for data leaders is connecting those data challenges to your enterprise-wide objectives. So on the left-hand side, you have several different challenges outlined as an example. I'll give you this one example. So if you go out there and say quality is bad, nobody's listening to you, how do you make people to care about this? You should find ways to see if quality is impacting customer experience, which is actually a big initiative maybe going on for your company. Or if you have insurance companies like agents who need appropriate data to service customers, if they don't have that visibility, they're not productive. So identify your challenges, tie that back to the objectives, really critical. And once you identify all of these different areas, like the third tenet is really about identifying your key KPIs. The last tenet is about control and measurement. So how do you have this whole ecosystem where you can manage all expectations of your data consumers, like people coming in and seeing what data is out there, how can I use it, who do I talk to? So for a chief data officer, they gotta maintain control and measurement, like measure success. So there are several different dimensions here that I highlight, which is common language, make sure everybody's speaking the same language. There's a collaborative process where there's a place for consumers and owners of data to collaborate with each other. Make sure data is of high quality. It's a good sign that this initiative is working. Privacy standards, ownership. So you gotta know who are the people to reach out when you have questions about data. Of course, automating tasks such as collecting, cleaning, and collaborating around data enrichment. And of course, lastly, risk and compliance aspect of data itself, which is if you're sharing data internally, externally, how do you manage that? So with that being said, I want to bring us to close. Thank you so much for being here, listening in. I'm going to open the floor for any questions that you may have, but thank you for taking the time, spending with me to understand how you could unleash your data strategic force or value itself. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And if any questions, I'll take some time now to answer your questions. Thank you so much, everybody.